The day that we moved for me was a culmination of so many things, because there was so much life and so much vitality that we poured into that little building, and it held so many memories. And I really sensed this poignancy of leaving this place. It's kind of like when you're growing up and you're ready to leave your parents' home and you're very excited about the future, but there's sort of a wistfulness of leaving behind a childhood and so many memories that were so warm and so positive. And I know for so many people there were such formative experiences happened in that shul. To be able to move with so many people and all of those memories to our new place, I mean, I really felt like we were carrying our entire experience with us.
We have been members of the temple since there was no temple.
Right.
From day one, we were among the first few families who started to get together to celebrate holidays and to just be family to one another.
Basically, there were a group of people who got to know one another, and their needs became expressed very soon.
Because there was no Jewish community at that time when we arrived in '56.
And the group gradually grew. In some place around 1959 or 60, we began to coalesce seriously and started doing more than just meeting. We began having services. There were Saturday morning services at people's homes.
There was no Bet Haverim when we looked around for an affiliation, and we decided that we had to start one. We somehow managed to locate the bulk of the Jews in Davis and on campus. I don't remember what the mechanism of that was, but we subsequently had a meeting at this house which filled the entire available space, which isn't saying so much. But at that time we decided we were going to found an organization, and we elected a president. Congregation Bet Haverim eventually sprang.
When we first came to Davis, that's when we joined, and that was in 1958.
But of course there wasn't any Beit Haverim at all. There was a bunch of heterogeneous Jewish people in a small community. But they met in houses like ours. And we had potlucks and we had meetings, and wasn't there a meeting once when Larry and Danny Ravid competed for the presidency?
One time we met right here in this living room, and there was an even split between Danny Hohenstein and Larry Rappaport. And so the two disappeared in that room right behind us here and talked it over and came out again, and they had settled it between them that Danny was going to be president at that time.
We never knew.
So you can see the degree of informality that
they may have flipped a coin. I don't know how they did that.
I think our first real meeting was a Hanukkah party in December of 1958. That was our first real experience. At that time, the number of Israelis in Davis was probably equal to the number of non-Israeli Jews. And it was a very lively evening. We had a lot of fun, and Joyce looked across the room and saw this woman who she thought looked familiar. And
it turned out it was Norma Rappaport. And Norma and I had graduated from Brooklyn College, but we didn't know each other then. We just were kind of visions across crowded classrooms. But that was the start of a very nice friendship that's lasted all these years.
We came to in Davis in 1968 and began with the fellowship almost immediately. And in those years, we were meeting for services at the Hillel, operating with the shulmobile, which you must have heard about.
I bought a blue Chevrolet station wagon. It had to be blue because we decided to name it the shulmobile.
Marv Goldman had an elongate blue. He says blue. I think it was aqua. He's colorblind.
It was a standard 1962 Chevrolet station wagon, blue.
Each Saturday morning, the chairs would get loaded up in the back of the shulmobile and brought to the house where there would be services.
So after we arrived, we didn't have a building, which meant, and you may have heard this story from others, basically our station wagons. Everybody had a station wagon, and our station wagons were the facilities where we stored and we schlepped and transported items. So we were called a schlepping congregation, so to speak.
We used to joke about it because it was, in fact, if I recall right, everybody had a station wagon in those days.
My favorite story is the trip to the orphanage in San Francisco to bring down and carry back to Davis the Ark. It had been in Homewood Terrace, a Jewish orphanage in San Francisco. And in the late 60s, the orphanage had closed down, and they were basically getting rid of all of their accoutrements. And somehow somebody in Davis heard that they had an Ark and some other things. And so a group of us with station wagons, the perennial station wagons, traveled to San Francisco.
We went down there and we got the Aron Kodesh, the Ark housing, and stored it in Alvin Sokolo's garage along with some tablets with the 10 Commandments on it and a few other things, I think. And the shulmobile was put to use to drag everything back to Davis from San Francisco.
We dislodged the Ark from its support beams, put it into somebody's station wagon, picked up some other things that they were getting rid of, stopped off at the bagel factory on Gary in order to load up in bagels.
And brought it back to Davis and brought it to Al Sokolo's garage, which was multi-purpose. And it stood there, or lay there, I guess, for some 6 months before it could be utilized.
We brought all that stuff back. It was a major expedition, and it was all do it yourself, I think. We then kept the Ark. This was before we had a building. There was no building to put it into. So we kept the Ark in our garage here for several years, including 1 year in which we were on sabbatic. We told our tenants, do not touch what's under that tarp.
The Ark came from Homewood Terrace in San Francisco, the Jewish orphanage. It is acquired before we had a building and lived in the Sokolo's garage, but it came from Homewood Terrace, and so my family has had an influence on this synagogue before we ever moved here, because my mother closed down that orphanage.
Graduate student here, Julie Kirshner, decided we would hold a bar mitzvah for his son in his backyard. We had never done anything like that before, so we got all the troops together and managed to have a minyan, and we had this very nice party in Julie's backyard. And the guys are standing around, and we were feeling so good about it. And one of them, a fellow named Mort Starr, said, "You know, this is so good. I'd give $100 to get something started so we could really build something here."
This was such a wonderful thing, the service. We must do something permanent here and start a program that will eventually result in us having a building and a synagogue. And that started the building fund.
And so at that point, I think the Jewish Fellowship got started, and we got a little committee together and started raising funds to build a facility.
There was a time by about 1968, 69, 1970 when things got a little more serious. And there were discussions as to what kind of building could we afford, where would we put it.
By the time we actually constructed the building, there were about 40 families that were participating in that. But certainly the plans started, the building opened in 1972, so the plans started a few years before that. And I think I think the push for that was that we felt there was enough of a critical mass that we could put up a building, and that having a building of our own would draw in a lot more people.
The years from 68 to 1969 and 70 were years during the time we were developing the plans for the purchase of and then the building of the building on the corner of Oak and Colville Boulevards.
And then somehow a Jewish architect moved to town, and he learned about our need. Bud Goldberg was his name. He worked up some ideas, and he invited a small group of us to a meeting in Marv's house. I believe it was Marv's house. He had something under wraps, and he explained a little bit about the project, and then he took the wraps off, and essentially it was a scale model of the building on Oak Avenue, as it is today, and we were awestruck.
The thing that I would most like to share is the scroll presented to me by the fellowship toward the end of my term as president during the 1971-72 year. And I especially like the fourth whereas comments, if anything goes wrong, we know where to place the blame. The builder was a Jewish guy then in Davis, Al Passavoy, the architect, and the periscope type design was his trademark. He'd been doing buildings in Sacramento with that same design.
It's a great feeling to know that what we started many, many years ago, we and those handful of families, has emerged into a very vibrant Jewish community. It's a great feeling.
Fond memories is in kindergarten when we used to have this huge tree right there, and they cut it down and we were all really sad. The best thing I liked about this building is my teachers.
The 5 bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs my children had in this synagogue.
We did our baby naming here. Actually, we did all 3 kids.
Probably my bat mitzvah, because that was really fun and exciting.
The Purim services that we had here, those were the most fun, and the clothing sale.
We were married here in 1988, and there hadn't been a Jewish wedding in this synagogue for 10 years.
I also have to say my bat mitzvah, it was a really memorable day and it was a great experience. And I also have fond memories of all the friends that I've made.
I can't even begin to think. It's been a fabulous place, very important to us for 30 years.
It was a massive bar mitzvah of 5 people. Our son Joshua was turning 13, the Bieberstein's daughter Helen, the Chaikin's son, Halstein's son David, and then an anomalous young man named Joshua Mark Stein. Our son's name is Joshua Stein. And this boy was here for just a year, and he had the effrontery to be named Joshua Stein, but his middle name was Mark.
There was Stein, Bieberstein, and
Chaikin.
And Chaikin.
Sammy Kirshner's bar mitzvah, this was on the hottest day in June for years, and it was, 110 and no shade. And so all this stuff was out there to eat and drink. And the grown-ups were suffering from the heat, and these 4 boys were circling around where the wine was, and they were imbibing themselves with the temperature 110. And so here these kids ended up pretty tiddly. And we always remembered this with great pleasure because they were so good-natured and behaved so well, but they were not. They were DUI.
A rabbi who was here, Bonnie Coppell, and she wasn't everybody's favorite, but she brought a lot of things to the congregation which weren't favored at that time, but have since then become regular with every congregation, including our congregation. And she brought these social action themes and so forth into the service, into the congregation.
And that was our first rabbi, and she introduced the observance of Shavuot because we had not observed Shavuot before, and she made it very beautiful. She also introduced the custom of having a luncheon after Shabbat services, and I remember we did that once at the Meta Voice, and I remember our daughter walking home with us, she was a youngster then, saying, I'm so glad I'm Jewish, and it was a wonderful thing to hear.
I loved being able to sit in the service and look at one of the pictures that was near the front and could see in the picture not only it, but a reflection of the trees and the seasons from the back window. It was just beautiful. You could just sort of go into it.
Well, the group that I'm really involved with now, we have this really great Havurah. And I think that initially I would not have thought it would have worked. But over time, our Havurah has probably been one of the most active, and we have an event every month. We all have a great time together. Everybody shows up. We've doubled our size. So I think if I was to look at it right now, I would say what's really interesting is that the group that I become friends with within the congregation is this Havurah. It became a very, very flexible group, and it's really it's been a really fun group to be with.
We had auctions, and Al Sokoloff and Sandy helped so much with that, and Al was the auctioneer, and people made all sorts of things. Linda Hirsch made her chocolate decadent cake, and Helen Singer made her strudel, which we bid a lot of money for won.
We paid $50 for a can of her strudel.
A tin of Helen's strudel.
It was a very competitive bid.
I know, everybody was very happy about that.
I love our Simchat Torah celebrations. We unwrap the entire Torah scroll around the congregation. And people, all sorts of adults in the congregation, stand around very gently with their fingers on the edges, holding it up. And we unwrap the entire Torah, and they read, the rabbi and group of people go around and they read from parts of it, at the beginning and some of the middle and the end. And then eventually it's wrapped back up the other way to start the year of reading the Torah again.
By far and away, the most important thing in the congregation to me are the people who are part of the community and the people that I consider to be friends, and the friendships that have developed, and the warmth and the caring that really, I think, epitomizes this community, is a sense of how everyone pulls together, everyone is there for each other. I love the sharing that takes place on our Shabbat mornings at services, and get a sense of what's happening in people's lives.
One of the most memorable moments has been each of the adult Benot mitzvahs. There have been classes that have ranged from 3 to, I think 8 or 9 or 10. Every time there is an adult B'not Mitzvah class, I know it's time to bring the extra handkerchief, because the stories that are told are just so wonderful. There are people who are discovering themselves, discovering their faith, and discovering each other.
When many of us became B'not Mitzvah together on June 19th, 1999, and we studied together for 2 years, weeping and crying and laughing and carrying on with the rabbi's help. We had 4 boxes of Kleenexes under the bima, and we used 3.5.
One of my favorite memories in this congregation is something that happened in 1991. I'll start with a little bit of background. The city of Davis is a sister city to the city of Uman in the Ukraine. And there were 1 or 2 delegations at least, I'm not sure how many, of city of Davis people that went to Uman to visit the city. And then at a certain point, our Rabbi Ronald, suggested that we have an exchange of Jewish delegations. And because there was a lot of Jewish history in Uman, there was at one time a very large population of Jews in the city, a very large percent, maybe 30% at times, maybe as much as 50% at some times. And then there were pogroms and massacres in the Stalin era, and in other times there were several massacres. An exchange of Jewish delegations was arranged, and Ed and I and Rabbi Ronald were the Jewish delegation from Congregation Bet Haverim, and we spent some time in Uman, about 10 days. And then later that summer, the fall of 1991, there was a Jewish delegation from Uman that came to visit Davis and our congregation.
And Rabbi Ronald invited the delegates from Uman to the service, and he got a translator in, and he told them the entire history of their city from our point of view. And some of the people of Davis were very upset, but the people of Uman took the lesson, and there is now a plaque up that tells what really happened there. And we, right after that, put up the wall, the memorial wall, which I gather is being moved to the new site.
All the tiles were made by the children of the Sunday school, and it was just a real high point of our experience at the congregation.
When Rabbi Ronald was here, and we, as the city of Davis, became sister cities with Uman, we all made the tiles which have been placed on our wall of remembrance outside of Bet Haverim, and that was a beautiful, beautiful happening. It was wonderful.
The people from Uman who were visiting the city did come and spoke to us at a congregational meeting. I forget, some of them I think spoke English.
Some of them had some English.
Rather well, and it was, they took, I don't want to say hostility, it wasn't hostility, but I think they took the corrective historical lesson, if you want, quite well. I was very impressed by their response.
Mm-hmm.
And as Diane said, they went back and did something about it.
What really struck me about the Jewish community in Uman, that was very striking and very emotional to me, was that I felt, we stayed in the home of a Jewish family. There were 3 generations living in that house, and the 2 younger generations knew nothing about Judaism, but the older generation had memories of that went back to the early part of the 20th century. But even though we couldn't really communicate well because they didn't speak any English and we had no common language, we had just a few words we had a few words of Yiddish, the rabbi had some Yiddish, and yet when I was sitting in their house, I felt as though this house could have been my grandparents' house. My grandparents were from Lithuania. They were not from Uman, but there was something about the food that they served and the ambiance that made me feel as though here were my roots. It was a very extraordinary experience.
When I heard that the committee had found a church, I said to myself, well, that's nice. Clearly we need a larger building. And I had the impression, since they said it was on Anderson, that it was that barn-like building on the east side. And I said, well, it's not beautiful. I said that to myself. And then when I saw that they had bought this entire village on the west side, I was astonished that what a piece of luck. So I think it's a tremendous improvement.
The new location has so much potential. Really what I'm looking forward to is every time someone had a good idea on Oak Avenue, one of the responses would be, well, gosh, we don't have room, or we can't do it because we have services, or we have a school event, or we have this, or we have that going on. Now we really have the facility to do a lot of different things at the same time. So the possibilities are, if not quite endless, pretty close.
The new building has infinite possibilities. I'm struck by how we haven't really explored all the possible uses and the flexibility of that campus.
The new building that we have is such a change in quantity, and certainly there's qualitative changes too. It's beautiful, it's park-like on the grounds, and the sanctuary itself is warm. What I'm looking forward to is on this campus with all these different kinds of buildings and all these different kinds of spaces, lots of different kinds of Jewish things going on. Studies, services, some of it going on at different times, but some of it going on simultaneously.
Space, more space. And I mean, the most tremendous thing is the other buildings, a real office, opportunities to have a library, adequate school facilities without renting them elsewhere and moving all the stuff around, being able to leave the stuff up on the walls for the kids.
Yes. I can't wait to see our classes projecting what we learn and what's going on here on Sunday and during Hebrew school. Now that we have the space that we can fill the walls with posters and, you know, leave the Hebrew letters on the blackboard without rushing to erase it before we close up. Bookshelves full of Hebrew books. Kids go to the library to check out a book or to listen to a story from a storyteller.
I think the fact that we had piles of books gathering dust behind old curtains was really a terrible thing. We had big surprises when we packed them up, all the things that were there. And I'm looking forward to having this put into an accessible place and having it become a focus of learning and recreation and enlightenment and discussion.
I think the fact we have the school there, I think it's going to create a much better spirit with all of us in one location. And I also think that we'll have a lot more programming because we now have a facility in which we can offer even more than we have now. It's another step in growth, and I think it's going to be almost like a geometric growth. It's not just additive, because we can do so many more things now that we have the facility, and we'll see. But it all looks very positive from as compared to how small we were. I mean, I think this is a very momentous step.
Well, I think the most refreshing thing, I just went to a bar mitzvah in the new location, and there were many times at our old place where we kept trying to adapt outside and to use outside in one way or another. And we had some lovely trees and some lovely little spaces at the old place outside. But this one, there's a whole redwood grove. And actually, at the end of the progressive dinner that we just had, my feeling was we were having it in someone's house to have this dessert. And I said, we should have had this at the congregation where there's this beautiful redwood grove and we'd all be outside and together and it would just be beautiful.
The transition and the move is sort of a bittersweet experience for me. I talked the other day when we were saying goodbye for the first time. It was a little bittersweet. It was something we had labored to build and to really create. But the thought of going to this new beautiful place was very inspiring, and it was worth all the work that went into it.
I was very apprehensive initially, didn't want to leave our old building, which felt like an extension of my home. And I'd go and visit the new place, and I've been on committees involved with the transition. Once we had our celebration where we moved the Bima over and the Ark over and the Torah over, it was like home again.
The thing that really makes this congregation special, I think, that makes it really click for me, is the hugs on Saturday morning. I attend services pretty regularly on Saturday morning, and there is a very warm fellowship. It goes to a fundamental sense, I think, that we have, that this is a house of friends, Bet Haverim, but also that we're all in this together, and there is we can all learn from each other. And that's, I think, the ethos of the place.
Well, as I've gotten older, my desire for spirituality, or my appreciation of spiritual experiences as opposed to the strictly traditional religious experience, has increased. And I find that because of Rabbi Wolf's contribution and the people who are interested in this, that the congregation has been very responsive. And I feel that this is not just a place to satisfy ritual needs, but spiritual needs.
I like the attraction of the mystery. And the mystery is, I've said this several times, I had studied a little Hebrew, very little. Most of what I knew I gathered by listening and following in the prayer book and at the services. But that I wanted more, I did not want to give up saying of the prayers, the blessings, etc., in Hebrew instead of, and putting them in English instead, because I felt that a good deal of the power and the majesty of what's contained in the prayers is wrapped up in the Hebrew, but it's all there.
For almost 40 years, this congregation has been an important part of our lives, and it's enriched our lives. It's demanded a certain amount of commitments, a certain amount of effort on our part, but we've been repaid that many, many times. It's part of what makes our life fulfilling, satisfying, and rich, both spiritually and through the friends that we've made through the congregation.
We quelled and watched the way the community grew, and the way talent would seem to come out of the woodwork. You'd never know who was coming in next, and everyone who joined our little band had some kind of talent, and it's still that way. It's a remarkably rich treasure trove of experiences and talent. We're very fortunate.
What makes Bet Haverim special is that in a way it's become an extended family for us. So many people in the congregation do not have family nearby. And so this congregation then becomes family. And I think that's the most important thing, that it can do, really. I think we're very fortunate in our rabbi who's a very warm, caring person, and he engenders this feeling.
I grew up at Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco. You were an audience. You know, the rabbi and the cantor were up there doing everything. This isn't like that. I love the way it is here.
If you're interested in learning more about Judaism or participating in becoming an active member, which I believe adds to your Jewish experience, our congregation, I think, excels at that. In fact, if you go to Saturday morning services especially, you find the rabbi only leads one part of it, and there are members of the congregation who regularly lead other parts, and everyone is invited to participate. And I think it's a very enriching experience, and it makes the ritual come alive for you.
I think the initial feeling of the congregation, of it being a warm, welcoming place, has really, I think, stayed on as a very dominant characteristic. But I would say I love the way that the congregation is a very grassroots community, that many actually of our best programs and ideas come from the people themselves, and people saying, well, why don't we have this, and why can't we do that? And I said, terrific, let's do it. And we've started many great programs. The adult bat mitzvah class started that way. Our sisterhood started that way. We're a small congregation and every person counts.
I think that our job, and we do it, is really to open doors. And when you open doors, people come in and they choose how much they want to get involved in worship services, in mitzvah projects, in leadership positions, in joining committees. But our task is to open doors, and I think that this community does it beautifully. And I think that every stranger will not take him or her long to feel comfortable.
If I had a message to give to somebody who was thinking about being a part of the congregation, I think what I've really tried to emphasize with people is that the most important part about being a part of this community is that there's room for everybody, that there's a wide range of people who are part of this community, and that everybody has a role to play and everyone can have an impact. So I really think that what our congregation offers people is a meaningful chance to engage actively in their Jewish life, to learn and to grow, and to find a real sense of community with other like-minded Jews who want to make a difference in the world.
There is something really special about knowing people, and not just a couple of people, but a fair number of people, over a period of years and decades, and going through all of life's joys and troubles together, and being comforted and comforting. That life together really is so important. And that's both what you get by joining and what you give by joining.
I often think of some congregations being maybe a little distant from the new people. And I think that it may be wrong to say our arms are wide open here, but I do think there's an effort made to encourage people to come and to experience and spend several Shabbatot with us, and maybe go to some social events. I think we've got enough breadth, and the new building potential has increased dramatically to accommodate everybody.
It would be something Larry Rappaport told me many years ago when I was kind of nervous about Saturday morning services because I didn't know much Hebrew, and I kept trying to be very literal in understanding what was going on. And he said, don't be so literal, let it wash over you.
And the more you become involved, the more friends you make, the more input you have into the programs and the kinds of services. And so it's a way of really becoming involved and connected with other Jews if you take that opportunity.
I would say that this is a congregation that is extremely welcoming, that you would feel very much at home here. It's very personal, very participatory, and it offers a fairly, for its size, it offers a fairly broad array of programming.
Most people who join the congregation like it because there are a lot of different groups within it. And I would suggest to anybody in any congregation, actually, to go and make sure that there's a group that you're comfortable with, and that it's the people in the end that are important.
Be so happy to see you. Come back whenever you would like to. We're always here, and the door is always open, and we're a dear, funny, caring group.
The phrase that came to mind is that we are a caring community celebrating Jewish living, Jewish learning, and the life of the Spirit. That this is a place where people come to live Jewishly, to learn about their heritage, and to develop their own internal sense of what it means to be Jewish. And I think that we have a sacred mission to open the doors of Judaism to everyone in the community who is interested in being a part of this wonderful community, and to touch their lives in a very profound way. And I've seen that happen again and again, of how people have in some ways just wandered in to our lives and have found themselves surrounded by a community of friends, of a Bet Haverim, a house of friends that they never knew existed but were always searching for. They were looking for a home, a place to belong, a spiritual home, and all of a sudden found it here at Bet Haverim.
That's a wrap.
Thank you
Cut.
so much.